Oh yeah. Did he mess everything up? I'll blame him. What's that? You probably should have told him to stop. Also, can I tell you guys a story? You know how my laptop broke a while ago and I didn't post the lectures? My car battery just died, and now I have to bike here. I feel like I'm not meant to be teaching this class. I feel like everything's against me.
You really appreciate
I jumped it, and then I drove it around, and then I parked it and got out and tried to start it again, and it died.
How long did you let it charge on
I drove around for like 10-15 minutes.
No, I mean like how long was it?
to be your alternator.
Not long, but like once it started, we took the battery off, and I thought I could drive around and it would charge it.
You gotta
But,
let it charge for like 5 minutes.
well, I'm taking it in to see if the battery's dead. If not, maybe it's just. Oh yeah.
The brake pedal was up, but the inside it was down.
Oh.
So the lights
And the lights just burned it out.
Yeah, sometimes your interior light
It's
stays
annoying.
on and it burns your battery.
Yeah, well maybe that's what's going on.
Or if you got something plugged into a board somewhere, like
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
a radio connector to Wi-Fi for like your phones.
Oh yeah, maybe that's it too. I didn't check any of these things. I just got angry and scheduled an appointment. Yeah.
You got some extra. How far are you from here?
It's like 5 miles. It's not that bad. It took me like 25-30 minutes to get here.
I'm glad it wasn't raining.
Yeah, at least it's not raining.
Yeah.
But that's why I'm wearing kicker clothes. It's gonna be cold tonight. So if you see someone biking home on the way after lab, please don't hit them. I do need a vest. No, I've got a little light on the back of my bike though. I could have Ubered, I guess. I'm also poor though, so I try to avoid that. But also one of my hobbies is like doing like long distance cycling and running, so it's sort of I'm like preparing for the apocalypse, I feel like.
You don't totally depend on your car like a lot of people.
Yeah, well, I would very much like to have it back, so I'll say that. Speaking of why I'm sore right now, I'm sore because part of the reason, like when I was biking, I couldn't breathe enough to get oxygen to perform a lot of cellular respiration. So since I couldn't do that, my cells underwent a process called fermentation, which is what we'll talk about now, which is a great segue. Sometimes if we don't have oxygen, we can't go through this last step, the electron transport chain. So oxygen is like what we call the final acceptor of the electron. So oxygen is very electronegative, so it's going to pull that electron through the electron transport chain. And if we don't have that oxygen, all of that negative charge from those electrons is going to build up, and finally it'll kind of get like full of negative charge, and it can't function anymore. And if it can't do that, then we can't do these second, third, and fourth step. So if we have no oxygen, we're not going to be able to convert our NADH and FADH2 back to NAD plus and FAD plus. And if we can't do that, then we can't keep doing these reactions. So we're just going to do glycolysis, and then we're going to do fermentation, and that way we can extract some of the energy out of glucose, but we don't need any oxygen. So that's kind of the overview of why we would do fermentation. So cellular respiration is what we would call an aerobic process because it involves oxygen. Fermentation is what we would call anaerobic because it does not use oxygen. So animals and bacteria, we're going to break down the pyruvate that we end with at the end of glycolysis into lactate. But plants and yeast are going to break it down to ethanol and CO2. Actually, also this breaks it down to CO2 as well. So I probably didn't put that. But alcohol is the main byproduct of. It should have a little CO2 arrow coming up a bit. Oh no, it doesn't. Never mind. I'm sorry. I'm getting all mixed up. So glycolysis is this top level. So we have glucose breaking down into pyruvate. That's glycolysis. And then these two forks are the two different types of fermentation. So we have what plants and yeast do, which is they break it down into an alcohol, ethanol, and they release some CO2. Animals and bacteria are going to break that pyruvate down into lactate.
That's about whiskey.
Does lactate have anything to do with lactic acid?
Yeah, exactly. So after you make this lactate and you put it into water, so everything is in an aqueous solution. So after you make this lactate, it's gonna it's gonna gain a hydrogen, I guess, and become lactic acid. Not entirely sure how lactate goes to lactic acid, but lactate does somehow turn into lactic acid. I forget the pathway. But that's a great point, though, is that as you accumulate this lactate in your cells, it creates a lot of harmful byproducts that we're going to talk about later. So that's part of the reason your muscles get so sore. Your muscles getting sore is like your body telling you that you're creating an environment in your muscles that is not conducive to working more. It's going to make you less effective. So as you get sore, it's like your body's saying, if this is really important, if you really have to get to class, go ahead and keep biking. But if you're just like out here doing nothing at all that's not important, you should probably stop, because you're going to start harming yourself if you keep doing this. And so I kind of like to personify the body. I think it's more helpful.
You can do weightlifting every other day.
Yeah.
Just tear your muscle down.
Right. That's more about like the muscle structure actually breaking, which is also happening when you're biking as well. But as you do things that require a lot of energy output, you're going to be creating this lactate as well. So there's a lot of reasons that you can't just work out endlessly, some of which are this accumulation of lactate and lactic acid.
I don't know if this is like in the cycle, but apparently the reason why you get like more sore is if you just like sit on the couch or something, but if you like active rest,
Right.
and like just like get on the treadmill or like walk around after.
Does lecture count?
Like I think
Lecture.
standing and walking around is blood because you're pumping blood.
Yeah.
So you're taking the lactic
That makes
acid
sense.
and like
It's really hard to just knock it out.
Yeah.
not just letting it like sit in your muscles, I guess.
I ran track before, and after races, it's always tempting to just like immediately lay down afterwards. But I did notice that you're way more sore afterwards than if you just kind of like try to walk it off. Great, good question. Slash points. So if we don't have oxygen, again, we can't do oxidative phosphorylation in these last three steps, so we have to undergo fermentation. So we're going to get into a little more of the details of this process. And just to illustrate a little bit more, fermentation is going to be taking the NADH that we make in glycolysis, and it's going to be converting it back into NAD+. Because if we don't convert the NADH back into NAD+, we can't keep doing glycolysis either, because we're going to use up all of our NAD+. So NAD+ is sort of hard to make for the cell, so it wants to constantly be recycling it so it can keep going through these processes. So in fermentation, it's going to convert our NADH back into NAD+. Like every molecule that we encounter, except the ones that we just exhale, like CO2, are really vital to the process. So if we have to use them in a reaction, we have to make sure that we have enough of them to start with. And so if we only did glycolysis, we would soon run out of this NAD+, and we couldn't keep doing that either. And if you can't keep doing glycolysis, then you can't get any energy out of the glucose, and then your cells are out of luck. So lactate fermentation, again, this is what animals and bacteria do. So we have glucose to start with, and it's going to go through glycolysis. And as it goes through glycolysis, we're going to make ATP and NADH. This is what we talked about before. I tried to use more color this time. I hope it's appreciated. I will try to add more color to my slides. But at the end of glycolysis, we have this pyruvate. So we're going to break this down through lactate fermentation into 2 molecules of lactate, and we're going to convert our NADH back into NAD+. And this is also going to help us be able to continuously break down glucose to make ATP and regenerate our NAD+. Any questions about this? Why is it necessary? Or
Just from the picture, NADH is not an enzyme?
no, it's not an enzyme. It's something that gets either oxidized or reduced as a way to carry energy.
It's just, it's like carbon. It's like, I'm forgetting what, I know they're energy,
Yeah.
but I'm just realizing that they're not like quantified in those reactions.
Yeah, that's fair.
Like, what are they?
So they hold more energy than is held in ATP, and they're just a way to transfer energy throughout this whole process. Do you want like the chemical structure, or yeah?
Because I do know from taking chemistry classes that like plus ATP is just like a standard thing.
Yeah.
Reaction.
Yeah.
Is it just like a collection of electrons, or like?
No, it's just a molecule that doesn't love to have an electron on it. So it's sort of like, imagine NAD plus is like an uncompressed spring, and then NADH is like a compressed spring. So once you compress it, then you can use that to do other things later. And that's what we're going to do in the electron transport chain. We're just going to kind of let that spring out, and it's going to release energy that we can use to do other things. But you have to go through a process where you convert it back into an uncompressed spring because it's necessary for glycolysis. But that's really its only purpose in our conversations. But it has other purposes, I'm sure, as well. Some of which actually we'll talk about Thursday during our guest lecture, what NAD and FAD do and how they can be used to measure cell behavior. So this is lactate fermentation. Again, an important thing to notice is that no oxygen is involved in this process. So if you're currently using all of the oxygen that you're inhaling to make energy, and you still need more energy because you're running from a line, or you're trying to get to class, or I know reasons you could be running or exercising or exerting yourself a lot. If you need that extra energy and you can't supply enough oxygen to make that happen, you'll undergo lactate fermentation to be able to keep going through glycolysis without needing oxygen. So this is when this would be used. And so since we can do this, it allows us to work a little bit harder than we could otherwise. The downside is it's less efficient. We use 1 glucose to make just 2 ATP rather than like 38 ATP. So it's way less efficient. We're creating some harmful byproducts in the form of lactate. So once those accumulate too much in your muscles, they're going to really lower the pH, and that can denature your proteins and do a lot of things that aren't helpful to your body. But sometimes you really need to keep making that ATP in order to do whatever activity it is that you're doing. Yeast and plants don't go through lactate fermentation. They undergo alcohol fermentation. So here they're making ethanol molecules, which has 2 carbons, and they're releasing 2 carbons as CO2. And this is how they're going to be regenerating their NAD+, so that they can keep going through glycolysis as well. So this is really similar to lactate fermentation, but rather than making lactate, we make CO2 and ethanol. So those are really the only differences. A lot of things get conserved among very different organisms. So plants and animals have a lot of processes that are the same, even though they look and behave very differently. But on a kind of molecular scale, when you look at how they use and make energy, they have a lot of things in common, which we'll talk about later. Again, so you're starting with glucose, you're making just a few ATP, and you're ending with ethanol. And we talked a little bit last lab about organic solvents. Ethanol would be a type of organic solvent. Is this good for cell membranes? Organic solvents? So when we added the bead cells to the organic solvent, we had a lot of that beta-cyanin, that pigment get released because we were damaging the pigments. Ethanol is going to do a really similar thing. And so you don't want too much ethanol in your cells because that's going to kill the cells as well. So some cells can tolerate it a little better than others, but generally speaking, this is also something that is somewhat harmful, but sometimes you do need the extra energy. So if you had like a yeast cell, which yeast undergoes this alcohol fermentation, and it had no oxygen, it could either just die or it could undergo fermentation. And so rather than die, it has this option of going through fermentation to keep surviving.
Is ethanol as unhealthy for plants as the lactic acid is for us?
That is a really good question. I don't know. It's definitely no. It's not good. No, they don't want it.
Alright.
Yeah, right. I'll just leave it at that. I'm not sure how to compare them, but it's definitely a harmful byproduct.
Now, you can plant lactic acid later.
No, no, they don't. But if you put plants in a really acidic environment, they would get unhappy, so they wouldn't be drunk. Being drunk is like a very complex biochemical process. Oh, sorry. Great, so just to compare them, so we have aerobic. This involves oxygen. There's a lot of color, isn't that exciting? This is cellular respiration. So we have oxygen involved here, and we make a lot of ATP. This is 38 molecules of ATP from one glucose. So this is very efficient. We're making a lot of ATP from one glucose molecule, and that's good because that ATP can be used to do different things later on. So we've really taken advantage of that glucose. Anaerobic, or without oxygen respiration, we'd also call this fermentation. We only make 2 molecules of ATP, but we don't need oxygen. And we also make this, they call it lactic acid here, or you could call it lactate as well. So this is a harmful byproduct. So we're making less ATP, we're making a harmful byproduct, but we don't need oxygen to do it. So again, that's the key to fermentation, is you don't need oxygen to do it.
So it makes a lot of sense, it's much.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, a little bit less, but yeah, but very much lower amount. 2 to 38, yeah. So like it's much less efficient, but again, it's necessary because sometimes the alternative is just like dying. Like, because if you're running from a predator and you can't get enough oxygen to make ATP to keep your muscles functioning, then you would potentially die. But if you can undergo this process that doesn't need oxygen, you can make more ATP, you can run a little bit faster, a little bit further, and then maybe survive, and then reproduce, and then your kids can survive and reproduce, and then that's how this becomes more common.
So it's basically your backup support.
Yeah, great. It's like a backup support, yeah.
Did both of these respiration systems take roughly the same amount of time? I mean,
This would be probably quicker, I'd imagine, but
not like 16 times quicker, 19 times quicker.
I have no idea. I don't know what the relative rates are. I don't think it's really so much a time thing as an oxygen thing, though.
Kilojoules.
Okay.
Yeah, kilojoules is a unit of energy. That's a really good question, though. Maybe it is a lot quicker. I could see it being a lot quicker, but I don't know for sure. All right, that's everything I wanted to cover. So we can take a 5-minute break, and then I can hand out the review sheet, and we can do that the rest of the class.